Hi, I'm Sarah. They laughed at me at my college graduation when my father stood up during the family celebration and announced to everyone that I'd never amount to anything, that 4 years of business school was just an expensive way to delay my inevitable failure. My mother nodded along, my brother smirked, and my cousins whispered behind their programs. Now, 3 years later, my cybersecurity company just went public at a valuation of $200 million, and every major news outlet is calling me the youngest female veteran to lead a successful tech IPO. But let me tell you what really happened in between. I hadn't expected the sting of that graduation day to follow me for so long. May 15th, 2021, University of Colorado Boulder. I should have felt proud walking across that stage in my cap and gown, degree in hand, summa cum laude. I'd done it while juggling a part time job, while dealing with the aftermath of my deployment in Afghanistan, while fighting through panic attacks that would leave me gasping for air in library study rooms. But as I looked out into the audience from that stage, searching for my family's faces among the sea of proud parents and siblings, all I could think about was the conversation that had happened the night before. We'd been sitting in the hotel restaurant, the whole family gathered around a table that suddenly felt too small. My parents, David and Linda Martinez, my older brother Carlos, my Aunt Rosa and Uncle Miguel with their twin daughters, Sophia and Elena. Everyone was making small talk about the ceremony, about my plans after graduation, when my father set down his coffee cup with that deliberate clink that always preceded his pronouncements. Sarah, he'd said, not looking at me directly, I need to be honest with you about something. The table went quiet. My mother's fork paused halfway to her mouth. This whole business degree thing, this idea you have about starting your own company, it's not realistic. I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my voice steady. What do you mean, Dad? You've been living in a bubble here at school. The real world doesn't work the way they teach you in those classrooms. You think because you served overseas that automatically makes you qualified to run a business? Military experience doesn't translate to the corporate world, Mika, and frankly, you don't have the personality for it. Carlos nodded along, cutting into his steak. Dad's right, Sarah. You've always been too quiet, too in your head. Business is about networking, about being aggressive, about taking risks. That's not you. My Aunt Rosa tried to soften it. What your father means is that maybe you should start smaller. Find a good job with benefits, work your way up slowly. There's no shame in being practical. But my father wasn't finished. I've been in construction for 30 years. I've seen plenty of people with big ideas and fancy degrees. Most of them fail within the first 2 years. The ones who succeed, they're different. They're natural leaders, natural salespeople. They have connections, family money to fall back on. We don't have that luxury. My mother finally spoke up, but not in my defense. Your father just doesn't want to see you get hurt, sweetheart. Maybe you could use your degree to get a job at a nice stable company, something in administration or human resources. I looked around the table at these people who were supposed to believe in me, supposed to support my dreams, and realized that not one of them saw me the way I saw myself. Not one of them remembered the girl who'd fixed their computers growing up, who'd taught herself to code at 14, who'd managed cybersecurity protocols for an entire forward operating base in Kandahar. To them, I was still just a quiet little Sarah who preferred books to parties, who'd come back from deployment different and damaged. I'm not asking for money, I said quietly. I'm not asking you to invest in anything. I'm just asking for you to believe that maybe I know something about what I'm capable of. My father leaned back in his chair, that familiar look of patient condescension crossing his face. Sarah, believing in yourself is one thing. Delusion is another. I love you, but I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that you're going to be the next Steve Jobs. You're a smart girl, but smart girls don't always make successful entrepreneurs. The conversation had shifted after that, moving on to safer topics, like Carlos's job at the insurance company and my cousin's upcoming high school graduations. But his words sat in my stomach like stones through the rest of the dinner, through the night in my hotel room, and all the way to the graduation ceremony the next morning. Standing on that stage, diploma in hand, I'd felt simultaneously proud and hollow. I'd accomplished something significant, something that had required discipline and sacrifice and intelligence. But the people who mattered most to me had already decided it didn't matter, that it was just an expensive piece of paper, leading nowhere important. After the ceremony, during the family photos and congratulations, my father had gotten louder and more expansive, perhaps loosened by the champagne my uncle had brought. We were standing near the student center, other families celebrating around us, when someone asked me about my post graduation plans. Well, I started. I'm actually working on launching a cybersecurity consulting firm. I've been developing some proprietary software that could help small and medium businesses protect themselves from. There she goes again, my father interrupted, laughing in a way that made my cheeks burn. Always with the big dreams, this one. Sarah, honey, you haven't even had a real job yet. You think you're going to start a tech company? In this economy? Other families nearby had started to notice the commotion. My father's voice carried, and he seemed to be enjoying the audience. Don't get me wrong, I'm proud of her for finishing school. But she's got these ideas about being some kind of tech mogul. Kids these days, they watch too many movies about Silicon Valley. My brother had jumped in then, seemingly unable to resist. Remember when she thought she was going to be a professional gamer when she was 16? Or when she wanted to join the debate team because she thought it would make her a better CEO someday? The military was good for her, my father continued. Gave her some discipline, some real world experience. But now she thinks that translates to running a business. Sarah, Miha, you're book smart, but business isn't about books. It's about people skills, about reading situations, about taking calculated risks. You're too careful, too analytical. You second guess yourself too much. I stood there in my graduation gown, surrounded by families celebrating their children's achievements, listening to my own father systematically dismantle my confidence in front of strangers. The worst part wasn't the public humiliation, though that stung. The worst part was the way my mother smiled and nodded along, the way my brother seemed genuinely amused by my supposed delusions of grandeur, the way my cousins looked at me with that mixture of pity and embarrassment that suggested they agreed but felt bad about it. Dad, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper, can we maybe not do this here? He looked around as if suddenly remembering we were in public. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. I'm sorry if this is embarrassing, Sarah, but someone needs to give you a reality check. You're 26 years old. It's time to stop pretending and start thinking about your actual future. That night, alone in my apartment off campus, I sat at my desk with my laptop open, staring at the business plan I'd been working on for months. The cybersecurity software I'd been developing, the market research I'd compiled, the financial projections I'd run and rerun until I could recite them from memory. Was my father right? Was I deluding myself? Was I really just a quiet girl with big dreams and no realistic understanding of how the world worked? I thought about my time in Afghanistan, about the nights I'd spent monitoring network intrusions and developing countermeasures while mortars fell outside our compound. I thought about the commendations I'd received, the problems I'd solved, the systems I'd secured. None of that felt like delusion. None of that felt like playing pretend. But sitting there in the darkness, replaying my father's words and my family's laughter, I felt smaller than I had in years. Maybe they were right. Maybe I should find a safe job, work my way up slowly, prove myself in someone else's company before I even thought about starting my own. Maybe believing in myself wasn't enough. Now tell me, what would you do if everyone you trusted told you your dreams were too big? If the people who raised you looked at your biggest aspirations and saw only failure waiting to happen, would you listen to them and play it safe? Or would you bet everything on the voice inside that says you're capable of more? Drop a comment below and let me know what time you're watching this and where you're from. I read every single comment and I want to know your story too. Because here's the thing about being underestimated, it gives you a kind of freedom that confidence never could. When no one expects anything from you, when everyone has already written you off as a dreamer with no practical sense, you stop worrying about disappointing people. You stop second guessing every decision because you're afraid of proving them right. You just focus on the work. That's exactly what happened to me in the weeks following graduation. While my family went back to their normal lives, satisfied that they'd given me the tough love I apparently needed, I found myself in a strange state of clarity. The sting of public humiliation had faded, replaced by something harder and more focused. If they were so certain I would fail, then failing wouldn't be a surprise to anyone. But succeeding, really succeeding, would be something else entirely. I moved back to my tiny studio apartment in Denver, the one I'd kept throughout my senior year by working weekends at a computer repair shop. It wasn't much: 400 square feet, a Murphy bed that doubled as my desk when folded up, a kitchen that was really just a hot plate and a mini fridge. But it was mine. And more importantly, it was quiet. No one dropping by to check on my progress, no family dinners where I had to defend my choices, no well meaning relatives asking when I was going to start sending out job applications. The first thing I did was take a hard look at my finances. I had about $8,000 saved up from my deployment and various part time jobs, plus the GI Bill money I hadn't used for tuition. Not exactly venture capital funding, but enough to live on for 6 months if I was careful. 6 months to prove that my cybersecurity software could work in the real world, to find clients who would pay for what I was building, to turn my father's skepticism into something that looked more like surprise. I'd been working on the software since my junior year, initially as a class project that had grown into something much more ambitious. The idea was simple enough. Small businesses were getting hammered by cyber attacks because they couldn't afford the kind of comprehensive security systems that big corporations used. They needed something automated, something that could learn their normal patterns and flag anomalies without requiring a full time IT security team. Most of the existing solutions were either too expensive or too complicated for companies with fewer than 50 employees. My software, I called it ShieldNet, was designed to be the middle ground, sophisticated enough to catch real threats, simple enough for a small business owner to manage without a computer science degree. I tested it extensively during my senior year, running simulations and penetration tests until I was confident it could actually work. But testing in a classroom lab was different from deploying it in the real world, with real data and real consequences. The first month after graduation was brutal in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not because the technical work was harder than expected. If anything, having the freedom to work without academic deadlines made the coding smoother. The brutal part was the silence. Days would pass without meaningful human interaction, just me and my laptop, and the low hum of the air conditioning unit that barely kept the apartment cool during Denver's unusually hot summer. I'd wake up at 6, make coffee with the French press I'd inherited from my college roommate, and sit down at my makeshift desk, really just a folding table I'd bought at Target, to review the previous day's work. The software was coming together faster than I dared to hope. Each morning brought new features, new capabilities, small breakthroughs that felt enormous in the isolation of my studio apartment. But the loneliness was starting to get to me. During my deployment, I'd been part of a team, surrounded by people who depended on me and whom I depended on in return. In college, even during my most antisocial study sessions, there had been the background noise of campus life, the knowledge that I could walk to the library or the student center and find people to talk to. Now there was just silence and the occasional sound of my neighbors moving around in their own small spaces. I started taking walks in the evenings, partly for exercise and partly just to be around other people, even strangers. There was a coffee shop about 6 blocks from my apartment that stayed open late, filled with other people working on laptops. And I began stopping there for dinner, usually just a sandwich and coffee, sometimes a piece of pie if I was feeling extravagant. The baristas got to know me by name, and while we never had conversations beyond ordering, there was something comforting about the routine, about being recognized somewhere. It was during one of these evening coffee shop sessions that I had my first real breakthrough. I'd been struggling with a particular piece of the software architecture, trying to figure out how to make the threat detection algorithms run efficiently on older computer systems. Most small businesses weren't running the latest hardware, and if my software slowed down their computers, they'd uninstall it within a week. I was staring at lines of code on my screen, nursing my third cup of coffee of the day, when I overheard a conversation at the table next to me. Two women, probably in their 40s, talking about their small marketing firm and a recent security breach that had cost them 3 days of work and nearly lost them a major client. The IT guy says we need to spend 15,000 on some enterprise security system. One of them was saying, 15,000. That's more than we spend on rent in 3 months. But he also says if it happens again, we could be looking at lawsuits from clients whose data got compromised. What about those cheaper options? Yar and the other woman asked. There have to be security programs that don't cost as much as a car. He says the cheap ones are basically useless. They'll catch the obvious stuff, but anything sophisticated will get right through. It's like putting a screen door on a bank vault. I sat there listening to this conversation, realizing that these women were exactly the market I'd been trying to reach. Small business owners who understood they needed security but couldn't afford the enterprise level solutions. They were stuck in exactly the gap that ShieldNet was designed to fill. Before I could lose my nerve, I turned around and introduced myself. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't help overhearing your conversation about cybersecurity. I'm actually a software developer who's been working on exactly this problem. They looked skeptical at first. I was 26 years old, sitting alone in a coffee shop with a laptop covered in military unit stickers. Not exactly the image of a professional IT consultant. But when I started explaining what I'd been building, how the software worked, why it was different from both the expensive enterprise solutions and the cheap consumer programs, they became genuinely interested. How much would something like this cost? One of them asked. I realized I had no idea. I'd been so focused on building the software that I hadn't given much thought to pricing. I'm still in the development phase, I said honestly, but the whole point is to make it affordable for businesses like yours. Could I maybe get your contact information? When I'm ready to start beta testing, you might be exactly the kind of client I need feedback from. They gave me their business cards, and I walked home that night feeling more energized than I had in weeks. It wasn't just that I'd found potential customers, it was that I'd confirmed what I'd hoped was true. There really was a market for what I was building. Real business owners with real problems that my software could solve. That conversation changed everything about how I approached the next phase of development. Instead of working in isolation, focused only on the technical challenges, I started thinking like a business owner. I researched pricing strategies for software as a service companies. I studied how other security firms marketed to small businesses. I began reaching out to local business owners, not to sell them anything, but to understand their specific needs and concerns. The more conversations I had, the more confident I became that ShieldNet could work not just as a piece of software, but as a real business. The technical challenges that had seemed so daunting in my apartment started to feel manageable when I remembered that I was solving actual problems for actual people. This wasn't just an intellectual exercise or a way to prove my family wrong, though that was certainly part of it. This was something that could genuinely help people protect their livelihoods. The call from my mother came on a Tuesday morning in late July, about 6 weeks after graduation. I was deep in a coding session, trying to optimize the real-time monitoring algorithms, when my phone rang with that familiar ringtone I'd assigned to family calls. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. These conversations rarely went well anymore. Hi, Mom, I answered, saving my work and leaning back in my desk chair. Sarah, honey, how are you doing? We haven't heard from you in weeks. Her voice had that particular tone that meant she was calling with a purpose, not just to chat. I'm good. Busy working on the software. Making good progress, actually. There was a pause, and I could almost hear her choosing her words carefully. That's great, sweetheart. But listen, your father and I have been talking, and we're a little worried about you. This whole startup thing, we're just concerned that you're isolating yourself, that you're putting all your eggs in one basket. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street below, where people were heading to their regular jobs, their predictable paychecks, their safe and sensible lives. What do you mean? Well, Carlos mentioned that his company is hiring for their IT department. It's a good position, benefits, room for advancement. He could put in a word for you. And Mrs. Rodriguez from church, her daughter works for that big accounting firm downtown. They're always looking for people with business degrees. Mom, I have a business degree because I want to start a business, not because I want to work in someone else's accounting department. I know. But maybe you could do this software thing as a side project while you get some real world experience. You know, learn how actual companies operate before you try to run one yourself. The familiar frustration started building in my chest. It was the same conversation we'd been having in various forms since high school when I'd first mentioned wanting to study computer science. Every time I expressed any ambition beyond what they considered reasonable for someone like me, there was always a gentler, safer alternative waiting in the wings. Mom, I served in Afghanistan. I managed cybersecurity for an entire military base. I think I have some real world experience. That's different, honey. That's government work, with clear chains of command and established procedures. The private sector is, well, it's cutthroat. Your father sees it every day in construction. Companies promising the world and then disappearing overnight. People losing their life savings chasing dreams that were never realistic to begin with. I closed my eyes and counted to 5 before responding. What if it works, Mom? What if I actually succeed? Another pause, longer this time. Sarah, we just don't want to see you fail. And if you do try this and it doesn't work out, we want you to have something to fall back on. That's all we're saying. After we hung up, I sat in the silence of my apartment for a long time. The word fail echoed in my mind, and I realized that my family had already decided I would fail. They weren't worried about me taking a risk and succeeding. They were worried about managing the aftermath of my inevitable failure. They were already planning my soft landing, already preparing the we told you so conversation that would come when I finally admitted defeat and accepted that regular job they'd been pushing. But something had shifted in me during those 6 weeks of isolation and work. I'd been in combat zones where split second decisions meant the difference between life and death. I debugged critical security systems while under mortar fire. I'd earned the respect of soldiers who initially saw me as just another college kid playing at being tough. The idea that I couldn't handle the challenges of starting a business seemed increasingly absurd. That afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing to work alone in my apartment, instead of trying to prove myself in isolation, I was going to find other people who understood what I was trying to do. Denver had a growing tech scene, and there had to be other entrepreneurs who were building companies from scratch, who were betting on themselves instead of accepting the safe path. I spent the evening researching startup communities and entrepreneur meetups in the area. There were several regular events: a monthly gathering called Startup Grind, a weekly coffee meeting for women entrepreneurs, and something called Founder Friday that met at a co working space downtown. The next Friday event was 3 days away. I almost chickened out twice before actually walking into that co working space. The building was all exposed brick and industrial lighting, filled with the kind of sleek furniture and motivational posters that screamed Innovation Hub. I felt underdressed in my jeans and university t shirt, surrounded by people in designer casual wear who looked like they'd stepped out of a tech magazine. But then I noticed something that made me relax slightly. Most of the people there looked nervous too. They were clutching coffee cups and business cards with the same uncertain energy I was feeling. This wasn't a room full of confident, successful entrepreneurs. This was a room full of people who were trying to become confident, successful entrepreneurs. The format was simple. Everyone got 2 minutes to introduce themselves and their company. Then there was time for networking and informal conversations. I listened to pitch after pitch, everything from social media apps to sustainable packaging solutions to meal delivery services. Some were clearly further along than others, but everyone was at some stage of building something from nothing. When my turn came, I stood up and introduced myself with a clarity that surprised me. I'm Sarah Martinez, and I'm building cybersecurity software for small businesses. Most companies with fewer than 50 employees can't afford enterprise level security, but they're getting hit by the same kinds of attacks as major corporations. My software, ShieldNet, provides automated threat detection and response at a price point that makes sense for smaller organizations. The response was immediate and encouraging. Several people approached me afterward, including 2 other women who were building B2B software companies. One of them, Jessica, had started a project management platform for construction companies and was about 6 months ahead of me in terms of development and customer acquisition. You should definitely apply for the accelerator program at Techstars, she told me over coffee after the main event had ended. They're specifically looking for companies solving real problems for underserved markets. Your military background would be a huge advantage. That they love founders with operational experience. I've never heard of Techstars, I admit it. It's a 3-month program where they give you seed funding, mentorship, and access to their network of investors. The application process is competitive, but if you get in, it's basically a fast track to scaling your company. Another entrepreneur, Marcus, overheard our conversation and joined in. Techstars is great, but you should also look at the local angel investor groups. There's Colorado Impact Fund, which focuses on companies with social impact potential. Military veterans starting companies that serve small businesses. That's exactly the kind of story they fund. I walked out of that meetup with a notebook full of contacts, resources, and next steps. More importantly, I walked out feeling like I wasn't crazy for believing in what I was building. These people understood the challenges I was facing because they were facing similar ones. They didn't think I was delusional for wanting to start a company. They thought I was smart for identifying a clear market need and building a solution for it. The drive home felt different than any drive I'd taken in months. Instead of returning to my isolated apartment to work alone on code that might never see the light of day, I was returning with a plan, a community, a sense that what I was doing wasn't just possible, but inevitable if I was willing to do the work. That night, I called my college roommate Maya, who'd moved to Seattle after graduation to work for Microsoft. I hadn't talked to her since the graduation disaster, partly because I was embarrassed about my family's public dismissal of my plans. Sarah, I was just thinking about you. How's the cybersecurity company coming along? You remember that? Of course I remember. You talked about it all senior year. That software you were building for your capstone project? You said you thought it could be a real business. Are you still working on it? I found myself smiling for the first time in weeks. Yeah, I am, and I think it might actually work. That's amazing. I knew you'd figure it out. You were always the smartest person in our program, and you actually understood real world applications, not just theory. Have you started looking for investors yet? Maya's enthusiasm was infectious. And as I told her about the meetup, about Techstars, about the conversations I'd been having with potential customers, I felt something I hadn't experienced since graduation day: genuine excitement about the future. Not nervous hopefulness, but actual excitement based on evidence and progress and possibility. After we hung up, I sat down at my laptop and began researching the Techstars application process. The deadline for the next cohort was still 2 months away, which gave me time to refine the software, gather more customer feedback, and put together a compelling application. For the first time since graduation, I had a concrete timeline, specific milestones, and a clear path forward. I opened a new document and started writing what would become my first real business plan. Not the academic exercise I'd completed for my entrepreneurship class, but a practical roadmap for turning ShieldNet into a real company. As I worked late into the night, I could almost hear my father's voice echoing from graduation day, warning me about the difference between dreams and reality. The funny thing was, he'd been right about one thing. There was a difference between dreams and reality. But what he hadn't understood was that reality could be shaped by persistence, by competence, and by the willingness to bet on yourself when no one else would. The Techstars application deadline was September 15th, which gave me exactly 8 weeks to transform what was essentially a sophisticated class project into something that looked like a viable business. 8 weeks to prove that I wasn't just a dreamer with a laptop, but someone who could execute on a real market opportunity. The weight of that timeline should have been intimidating, but instead, it felt liberating. For the first time since graduation, I had a concrete goal with a definitive end date. I started by reaching out to every small business owner I'd met or heard about through my coffee shop conversations and networking events. Instead of trying to sell them anything, I focused on understanding their specific security challenges. How often did they worry about cyber attacks? What had they tried before? What was their budget for IT security? How much technical complexity could they realistically handle? The conversations were eye-opening in ways I hadn't expected. Maria Santos, who owned a small marketing agency, told me about a ransomware attack that had encrypted all their client files the previous year. They'd paid the ransom, $3,000 they couldn't afford, and still lost 2 weeks of work because the decryption didn't work properly. We tried one of those antivirus programs after that, she said, but it kept flagging our design software as suspicious and slowing down our computers. We ended up uninstalling it within a month. David Kim, who ran an accounting firm with 12 employees, described a more subtle but equally damaging attack. Someone got into our email system and started intercepting communications with clients. We didn't realize it for 3 weeks. And by then, they'd gathered enough information to impersonate us in requests for sensitive financial data. We didn't lose any money directly, but we lost two major clients who decided they couldn't trust our security anymore. Each conversation reinforced what I'd suspected from my initial research. Small businesses were caught in an impossible situation. They couldn't afford enterprise level security solutions, but they also couldn't afford the consequences of inadequate protection. The existing options were either too expensive, too complicated, or too simplistic to be effective. Armed with this market validation, I began refining ShieldNet based on the specific problems I was hearing about. Instead of trying to build a comprehensive security suite that did everything, I focused on the three most common vulnerabilities: email based attacks, malware infiltration, and unauthorized network access. The software needed to be sophisticated enough to catch real threats, but simple enough that someone like Maria or David could install it, configure it, and forget about it. The technical challenges were significant but solvable. The harder part was everything else: pricing strategy, customer acquisition, support infrastructure, legal considerations. I spent hours researching how other B2B software companies structured their operations, reading everything from academic papers on subscription pricing models to blog posts from successful entrepreneurs about their early mistakes. One evening in mid August, while I was working late at the coffee shop that had become my unofficial second office, I struck up a conversation with another regular customer. Tom Bradley was a consultant who helped small businesses with their technology implementations, and he'd overheard enough of my phone calls to be curious about what I was working on. "You're building security software?" he asked, settling into the chair across from me with his laptop and what appeared to be his fourth espresso of the day. "Trying to," I said, "for small businesses that can't afford the big enterprise solutions. God, there's such a need for that. I spend half my time trying to convince clients that they need better security, and the other half explaining why all the options suck." He leaned forward, genuinely interested. "What makes yours different?" I walked him through the core functionality, explaining how the machine learning algorithms could adapt to each business's normal patterns and flag anomalies without generating constant false alarms. Tom asked smart questions about implementation timelines, about integration with existing systems, about ongoing maintenance requirements. "This could actually work," he said finally. "The market timing is perfect. Small businesses are finally understanding that they're targets, but nothing exists that's actually designed for them. Everything is either dumbed down consumer software or enterprise solutions that require a full IT department to manage. Would you be interested in beta testing it with some of your clients?" "Absolutely. In fact, I have 3 clients right now who are actively looking for better security solutions. If you're ready to start testing with real businesses, I could probably get you pilot programs with all 3. I felt my heart rate spike. This was exactly what I needed: real customers with real data and real consequences if something went wrong. It was also terrifying. Up until that point, ShieldNet had existed in the controlled environment of my apartment and simulated test scenarios. Deploying it in actual business environments was a completely different level of responsibility. "What would that look like?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Start with just one. Maybe Elena Rodriguez's insurance office. She's got about 8 employees, pretty standard small business IT setup, and she's been asking me for months about better security options. If your software works there, we can expand to the others." We spent the next hour discussing implementation details, support requirements, and success metrics. By the time Tom packed up his laptop, I had my first real customer pilot scheduled for the following week. It felt like stepping off a cliff, but in the best possible way. The pilot deployment with Rodriguez Insurance was both more challenging and more successful than I'd anticipated. The installation process revealed several user interface issues I hadn't considered. Things that seemed intuitive to me as the developer were confusing to Elena's office manager. But once we worked through those initial hurdles, the software performed exactly as designed. Within the first week, ShieldNet had flagged and blocked 3 separate phishing attempts and quarantined 2 suspicious email attachments that turned out to be malware. Elena was thrilled. I can't believe how much quieter my mind is now, she told me during our follow up call. I used to lie awake worrying about what might be happening to our systems overnight. Now I know I'll get an alert if anything unusual happens, but I'm not getting bombarded with false alarms about normal business activities. More importantly, from a business perspective, Elena was willing to pay for the software. When I nervously brought up pricing, I'd settled on $99 per month for businesses with up to 10 employees. She didn't hesitate. That's less than we spend on office coffee. If this prevents even one security incident, it'll pay for itself hundreds of times over. The success of the pilot gave me the confidence to expand testing to Tom's other clients. Within 3 weeks, I had ShieldNet running in 5 different small businesses, from a dental practice to a boutique law firm to a small manufacturing company. Each deployment taught me something new about user needs, technical requirements, or business model considerations. But the real validation came when Elena Rodriguez called me unexpectedly on a Thursday evening in early September. Sarah, I need to tell you something. My brother in law owns a restaurant in Boulder, and I was telling him about your software. He asked if I could introduce you. They had their point of sale system compromised last month and lost a whole weekend of revenue. Of course, I said, scrambling for a pen to write down contact information. Actually, it's not just him. I mentioned your software at our business association meeting on Tuesday, and 3 other people asked for your information. There's a florist, a small construction company, and someone who runs a chain of 3 hair salons. They all want to know if you're taking new customers. I hung up the phone and stared at my laptop screen, where I'd been putting the finishing touches on my Techstars application. Word of mouth referrals. Customer demand exceeding my current capacity. Real revenue from real customers who were genuinely satisfied with the product. These weren't just good signs. They were the exact metrics that accelerator programs and investors looked for when evaluating early stage companies. The Techstars application asked for detailed information about market validation, customer traction, and revenue projections. A month earlier, I would have had to rely mostly on theoretical analysis and optimistic projections. Now I had actual pilot customers, documented security incidents prevented, testimonials from satisfied business owners, and a growing waitlist of potential new clients. As I worked through the application over the next few days, I realized something had fundamentally changed in how I thought about what I was building. This wasn't just my personal project anymore, my way of proving my family wrong or validating my own capabilities. ShieldNet was becoming something bigger, a solution that real people needed, a business that could support employees and customers and stakeholders. The night before the application deadline, I called Maya in Seattle to get her feedback on my final submission. She read through everything carefully, asking pointed questions about my financial projections and go to market strategy. This is really impressive, Sarah. You've gone from concept to paying customers in less than 4 months. That's exactly the kind of execution that investors want to see. Do you think I have a real chance? I think you have more than a chance. I think you've built something that actually solves a problem people are willing to pay for. That's harder than it sounds, and you've done it while bootstrapping everything yourself. That's the kind of story that stands out in application processes. I submitted the application at 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the deadline. As I hit the send button, I thought about that graduation day conversation with my father, about his prediction that I'd never make it in the business world. 3 months later, I had a functioning product, paying customers, and a pipeline of interested prospects. I was about to find out if that was enough to convince one of the country's most selective startup accelerators to bet on me. Either way, I was no longer the uncertain graduate sitting in her apartment, wondering if her family might be right about her limitations. I was an entrepreneur with customers who depended on my software to protect their businesses. The transformation felt as significant as anything I'd experienced in the military. a fundamental shift in how I understood my own capabilities and potential. The Techstars interview notification came on a Wednesday morning in late September, exactly 2 weeks after I'd submitted my application. I was in the middle of a customer support call with the dental practice. Their software had flagged what turned out to be a legitimate but unusual file transfer when my phone buzzed with an email that made my hands shake. Congratulations, Sarah. We're excited to invite you to interview for Techstars Boulder. Your application demonstrates exactly the kind of market driven innovation and customer traction we look for in our portfolio companies. I finished the support call on autopilot, barely registering the dentist's thanks as he confirmed that everything was working properly. The interview was scheduled for the following Tuesday, which gave me exactly 6 days to prepare for what felt like the most important conversation of my life. But first, I had to tell someone. The isolation of the past few months had been both necessary and exhausting, and this felt too big to process alone. I called Maya first, knowing she'd understand the significance. Sarah, that's incredible. Techstars Boulder is one of their most competitive programs. The fact that they're interviewing you means you're already in the top 5% of applicants. I keep reading the email over and over again, trying to make sure it's real. It's real, and you deserve it. You've built something that actually works, that customers actually want. That's the hardest part of starting a company, and you've already done it. After Maya, I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time, considering whether to call my family. The interview invitation felt like vindication, proof that maybe I wasn't as delusional as they'd suggested. But another part of me wanted to wait to see how the interview went before sharing anything that could be interpreted as premature celebration. In the end, I decided to wait. Not because I was afraid of their reaction, but because I realized I didn't need their validation anymore. The paying customers, the interview invitation, the growing demand for ShieldNet, these were external confirmations of what I'd always known about my own capabilities. My family's approval would be nice, but it was no longer necessary for me to believe in what I was building. The weekend before the interview, I drove up to Boulder to scout the Techstars office and get a feel for the area. The building was in the heart of downtown, a renovated brick warehouse that housed dozens of startups and tech companies. I walked around the neighborhood, noting the coffee shops where I might work if I got into the program, the restaurants where I might grab lunch between mentoring sessions, the general energy of a place where ambitious people were building companies from scratch. Saturday evening, I checked into a small hotel near the campus and spent the night rehearsing my pitch. The interview format was straightforward: 15 minutes to present my company, followed by 30 minutes of questions from a panel of investors, successful entrepreneurs, and Techstars staff. I'd practiced the presentation dozens of times, but this felt different. This was my one chance to convince some of the smartest people in the startup world that ShieldNet deserved their investment and support. Sunday morning, I woke up early and went for a run through Boulder's trails, trying to burn off nervous energy and clear my head. The October air was crisp and clean, with the kind of clarity that made everything seem possible. As I ran, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this point. From my father's dismissive comments at graduation to that first coffee shop conversation, to the customers who now depended on my software to protect their businesses. The interview was scheduled for 2 p.m. on Tuesday. I arrived at the Techstars office 30 minutes early, wearing the one professional outfit I owned, a navy blazer I'd bought for job interviews during college, paired with dark jeans and the kind of understated jewelry that suggested competence without trying too hard. The waiting area was filled with other entrepreneurs, some looking confident and polished, others nervously reviewing notes on their phones. When they called my name, I followed a young woman down a hallway lined with photos of successful Techstars companies. Some of the names I recognized: startups that had gone on to raise millions in funding or get acquired by major corporations. The message was clear. This program had a track record of turning early stage companies into real successes. The interview room was smaller than I'd expected, with a long table where 5 people sat with laptops open and water bottles at hand. They introduced themselves quickly. 2 Techstars managing directors, a successful entrepreneur who'd gone through the program 3 years earlier, a venture capitalist from a local fund, and someone from the Boulder startup community who specialized in B2B software companies. Sarah, we're excited to hear about ShieldNet, said Jennifer Walsh, one of the managing directors. You have 15 minutes to tell us everything we need to know. I launched into the presentation I'd rehearsed countless times, but something interesting happened as I started talking. Instead of feeling nervous or rehearsed, I felt energized. These weren't skeptical family members questioning whether my dreams were realistic. These were people who understood exactly what I was trying to accomplish and were evaluating whether I had the skills and market opportunity to pull it off. I walked them through the market problem, showing data about the increasing frequency of cyber attacks on small businesses and the inadequacy of existing security solutions. I demonstrated the core functionality of ShieldNet, explaining how the machine learning algorithms worked and why they were more effective than rule based systems. I presented customer testimonials and revenue projections supported by real data from my pilot deployments. But the most powerful part of the presentation came when I talked about Elena Rodriguez, my first real customer. 3 weeks after we deployed ShieldNet in her insurance office, Elena called me at 8 o'clock on a Saturday night. She was at home, getting alerts on her phone about unusual network activity. Instead of panicking or waiting until Monday to deal with it, she was able to log into the dashboard, see exactly what was happening. Someone had plugged an infected USB drive into one of the office computers and remotely isolate the threat before it could spread to their client database. That's exactly the kind of outcome our software is designed to enable, I continued. Small business owners shouldn't have to choose between affordable security and effective security. They shouldn't have to become cybersecurity experts to protect their companies. They should be able to focus on running their businesses while knowing that their digital assets are protected by technology that's as sophisticated as what Fortune 500 companies use. The 15 minutes flew by, and then came the questions. They were tough but fair, the kind of inquiries that demonstrated genuine interest rather than skepticism. How did I plan to scale customer acquisition? What were my thoughts on pricing strategy as I moved beyond the early adopter market? How would I handle technical support as the customer base grew? What was my long term vision for the company? One question caught me off guard. Sarah, you're a solo founder with no previous startup experience. How do we know you can handle the operational challenges of scaling a technology company? I thought for a moment before answering. You're right that I don't have startup experience, but I do have experience managing complex technical systems under pressure. In Afghanistan, I was responsible for the cybersecurity infrastructure that protected classified communications for 3,000 personnel. When something went wrong, and things went wrong regularly, there was no customer support hotline to call, no senior engineer to escalate to. There was just me, the problem, and the knowledge that failure could have life or death consequences. Running a startup obviously isn't a combat zone, I continued, but it requires the same fundamental skills: the ability to solve problems quickly with limited resources, to stay calm under pressure, and to take personal responsibility for outcomes. Those are skills I've developed through experience that most entrepreneurs never get. The venture capitalist leaned forward. What about team building? Most successful companies require more than just technical competence from their founders. That's exactly why I want to be in Techstars, I said. I know I need to build a team, and I know I need mentorship in areas like sales, marketing, and operations. But I also know that the hardest part of starting a company, building something that customers actually want, is something I've already accomplished. Everything else is learnable if you have the foundation right. After 45 minutes, they thanked me and explained that they'd make their decisions within a week. I walked out of the building feeling cautiously optimistic, but trying not to get ahead of myself. The interview had gone well, but I'd learned enough about the startup world to know that going well didn't guarantee anything. That evening, I drove back to Denver and returned to my normal routine: customer support calls, product development, conversations with potential new clients. But something felt different. The interview had forced me to articulate not just what ShieldNet was, but what it could become. Instead of thinking about my software as a small business serving other small businesses, I'd started thinking about it as a technology platform that could scale to serve thousands of customers and that could become a significant player in the cybersecurity industry. 3 days later, my phone rang while I was debugging a compatibility issue with one of my client's accounting software. The caller ID showed Jennifer Walsh's name, and my heart immediately started racing. Sarah, I have good news. We'd like to offer you a spot in the next Techstars Boulder cohort. Are you ready to turn ShieldNet into a real company? I sat down hard at my desk chair, temporarily forgetting about the debugging session, about the client waiting for my fix, about everything except the fact that someone had just validated what I'd been working toward for the past 4 months. Yes, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm ready. Excellent. The program starts in 3 weeks. I'll send you the paperwork and logistics information, but Sarah, congratulations. We're excited to work with you. After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my apartment for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Techstars represented more than just funding and mentorship. It represented entry into a world where my ambitions were normal, where building a technology company from scratch was an everyday occurrence rather than an impossible dream. For the first time since graduation, I felt like calling my family to share good news. Not because I needed their approval, but because I wanted them to understand that the person they dismissed 6 months earlier was becoming someone they might actually be proud of. The call to my parents that evening was unlike any conversation we'd had since graduation. I dialed their number while sitting in my car outside the grocery store, needing the confined space to help me focus and the option of a quick escape if things went badly. Sarah, my mother's voice was warm but cautious. This is a nice surprise. How are you doing, honey? I'm good, Mom. Really good, actually. I have some news I wanted to share with you and Dad. Hold on, let me get your father on the line. I heard muffled conversation in the background, then the click of the speakerphone engaging. Hey, Mija. My father's voice came through, carrying that careful tone he used when he wasn't sure what to expect from me. Your mother says you have news. I do. My cybersecurity company just got accepted into Techstars Boulder. It's a startup accelerator program that provides funding and mentorship for early stage technology companies. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, my mother spoke. That's that's wonderful, sweetheart. What does that mean exactly? I explained the program structure, the 3 month intensive curriculum, the seed funding, the network of mentors and investors. As I talked, I could hear the shift in their voices, the careful surprise of parents realizing they might have underestimated their child. How many companies get accepted? My father asked. About 1% of applicants. They had over 3,000 applications for this cohort and selected 30 companies. Another pause. Sarah, that's really impressive. I had no idea these kinds of programs existed. The thing is, Dad, I already have paying customers. 5 businesses are using my software right now, and I have a waiting list of others who want to try it. This isn't just theoretical anymore. It's a real company solving real problems for real people. My mother's voice was softer now, tinged with what sounded like regret. Honey, we owe you an apology. At graduation, we were just worried about you, but maybe we didn't express that the right way. We thought we were protecting you, my father added. The business world can be brutal, and we've seen so many people get their hopes up, only to get crushed. But it sounds like you really know what you're doing. I felt a complex mix of emotions vindication, certainly, but also sadness about the months of family tension that could have been avoided. I understand why you were concerned, but I needed you to believe in me, even when the outcome was uncertain. We do believe in you, my mother said quickly. We're proud of you. We're just, we're learning that maybe we don't understand your world as well as we thought we did. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with my parents asking detailed questions about the program, about my customers, about my plans for growth. It was the first time since college that they'd engaged with my business aspirations as legitimate rather than concerning. But the real test came the next morning when Carlos called me directly. Sarah, Mom and Dad told me about this accelerator thing. That's actually pretty cool. Thanks, Carlos. I appreciate that. Listen, I was thinking, I've been working in insurance for 5 years now, and I know how much our industry struggles with cybersecurity. Small and medium sized agencies are constantly getting targeted, but most of the security solutions are either too expensive or too complicated. Would you be interested in talking to some of my contacts? I almost dropped the phone. Carlos had been the most vocal skeptic of my plans at graduation, the one who'd laughed about my delusions of grandeur. Now he was offering to help me find customers. That would be amazing, Carlos. I'd love to talk to anyone who might be interested. I'll make some calls. And Sarah, I'm sorry about what I said at graduation. I was wrong. The Techstars program started on a Monday morning in early November. The cohort of 30 companies represented an impressive range of industries and technologies. Everything from biotech startups developing new medical devices to consumer apps targeting niche markets to enterprise software solutions like mine. What united us was a combination of early traction, ambitious goals, and the kind of entrepreneurial drive that most people considered either inspiring or slightly insane. The first week was intensive orientation, designed to give us the tools and frameworks we'd need to accelerate our growth over the next 3 months. We learned about customer development methodologies, financial modeling for high growth companies, product market fit metrics, and fundraising strategies. But more importantly, we were immersed in a culture where building a scalable technology company was normal, where ambitious goals were expected rather than questioned. My assigned mentor was Rebecca Chen, a former Microsoft executive who'd founded two successful cybersecurity companies before becoming an angel investor. Our first meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning of the first week, and I was nervous about making a good impression. Tell me about your customers, yeah, she said without preamble, settling into her chair with a coffee and a legal pad. Not your product, not your technology, your customers. Who are they? What problems are you solving for them, and why do they pay you? I walked her through my customer base, from Elena Rodriguez's insurance office to the dental practice to the small manufacturing company. Rebecca took detailed notes, asking follow up questions about customer acquisition costs, retention rates, and expansion opportunities. You have something that most early stage companies struggle with, she said finally. Clear product market fit with quantifiable business impact. Your customers aren't paying you because they like you or because your software is cool. They're paying you because you're solving a problem that costs them money when it's not solved. But I feel like I'm just getting started. 5 customers isn't exactly a massive success story. 5 paying customers who are actively referring you to others is actually quite significant at this stage. The question is whether you can systematize and scale what you've been doing intuitively. She flipped to a fresh page in her legal pad. Let's talk about your customer acquisition strategy. Right now, how do people find out about ShieldNet? I realized I didn't really have a strategy. Everything had been word of mouth referrals and chance encounters. Rebecca helped me understand that this organic growth was actually a strength, not a weakness, because it indicated strong customer satisfaction. But to scale beyond boutique consulting, I needed to develop predictable channels for finding and converting prospects. Over the next several weeks, Rebecca introduced me to concepts I'd never encountered in business school: customer lifetime value calculations, sales funnel optimization, competitive positioning frameworks, go to market strategies for B2B software companies. Each mentoring session built on the previous one, creating a comprehensive roadmap for transforming ShieldNet from a successful side project into a scalable business. But the most valuable part of Techstars wasn't the formal curriculum or even the individual mentoring. It was the peer learning that happened constantly among the cohort companies. During lunch conversations, evening networking events, and informal coffee meetings, I learned from entrepreneurs who were solving similar challenges in different industries. Marcus Thompson, who was building project management software for construction companies, had developed an elegant solution for the pricing challenge I'd been wrestling with. Instead of charging a flat monthly fee, he used a tiered model based on the number of projects managed, which allowed small companies to start cheaply and scale their investment as they grew. Jennifer Park, whose company provided inventory management tools for restaurants, had cracked the customer support challenge by building extensive self service resources and training materials. Her customers could solve 90% of their issues without ever talking to a human, which kept her support costs manageable while maintaining high satisfaction scores. These conversations were invaluable because they came from people who understood the specific challenges of building B2B software companies. Unlike the generic business advice I'd found in books and online articles, these were practical solutions developed by entrepreneurs who were actually implementing them in real businesses. 6 weeks into the program, Rebecca suggested it was time to start thinking seriously about raising venture capital. You've proven that the business model works at small scale, she said. Now you need the resources to scale customer acquisition, build out your technical team, and expand your product capabilities. The idea of raising money from professional investors felt both exciting and terrifying. On one hand, it represented validation that ShieldNet could become something significant. On the other hand, it meant taking on obligations to people who would expect rapid growth and substantial returns on their investment. What if I'm not ready? I asked. What if I raise money and then can't deliver the growth that investors expect? Rebecca smiled. Sarah, 6 months ago you were working alone in your apartment with an idea and some code. Today you have paying customers, proven demand, and a clear path to scale. You're more ready than most entrepreneurs who raise seed funding. The question isn't whether you're ready, it's whether you're ready to think bigger than you've been thinking. That conversation marked another turning point in how I understood what I was building. For months, I'd been focused on proving that ShieldNet could work, that I could build a sustainable small business around cybersecurity software. Now I was being challenged to think about whether it could become something much larger. A platform that could protect thousands of businesses, a company that could employ dozens of people, a market defining solution that could reshape how small businesses approach cybersecurity. The shift in mindset was both exhilarating and sobering. If I was going to play at that level, I needed to develop capabilities I didn't yet have in sales, marketing, team building, strategic planning. But for the first time since graduation, those challenges felt exciting rather than intimidating. I had proof that I could execute on complex technical and business problems. Everything else was just a matter of learning and growing into the role. The investor presentation was scheduled for the second week of December, exactly 7 weeks into the Techstars program. Demo Day, as they called it, would put all 30 companies in front of an audience of over 200 investors, successful entrepreneurs, and media representatives. Each company got exactly 4 minutes to pitch their business, followed by networking sessions where investors could dive deeper into opportunities that caught their attention. I'd been rehearsing my pitch obsessively, working with Rebecca and the Techstars presentation coaches to distill everything about ShieldNet into a compelling narrative that could be delivered in under 4 minutes. The challenge wasn't just explaining what the software did, it was making investors understand the market opportunity and why ShieldNet was uniquely positioned to capture it. But 3 days before demo day, something happened that threatened to derail everything I'd been working toward. I was in the Techstars office, putting final touches on my slide deck, when my phone rang with an unknown Colorado number. Is this Sarah Martinez from ShieldNet? Yes, this is Sarah. This is Detective Amanda Walsh with the Denver Police Department's Cybercrime Unit. We're investigating a data breach at Pinnacle Construction, and we understand your company provided cybersecurity services to them. My stomach dropped. Pinnacle Construction was one of my newer clients, a small company that specialized in residential remodeling. I'd deployed ShieldNet in their systems just 3 weeks earlier, and everything had been running smoothly according to their IT manager. What kind of breach? I asked, trying to keep my voice professional while my mind raced through the implications. Someone gained unauthorized access to their customer database and employee payroll information. We're trying to understand how it happened and whether your security software was functioning properly when the incident occurred. I felt like the floor had shifted underneath me. A security breach at one of my clients wasn't just a technical problem, it was an existential threat to everything I'd been building. If ShieldNet had failed to prevent a major attack, my credibility would be destroyed. Worse, if I'd somehow created a vulnerability that enabled the breach, I could face legal liability that would bankrupt both me personally and the company. Detective Walsh, I need to access our monitoring systems and review the logs from Pinnacle's network. Can you give me any details about when the breach occurred or how it was discovered? The attack happened sometime between last Friday evening and Monday morning. Pinnacle's owner noticed unusual charges on the company credit card and started investigating. That's when they discovered that their customer database had been accessed and copied. I was already pulling up Pinnacle's monitoring dashboard on my laptop. The weekend in question had been quiet according to our automated systems. No alerts, no flagged activities, no indication that anything unusual had occurred. But as I dug deeper into the logs, I started to see a pattern that made my blood run cold. The attack had been sophisticated, using legitimate administrative credentials to access the database during normal business hours on Friday afternoon. But the credentials belonged to Jake Morrison, Pinnacle's IT manager, who I knew had been out of town that entire week for his daughter's wedding. Detective Walsh, I think I know what happened. Someone gained access to legitimate employee credentials and used them to access the database during normal business hours. Our software detected the access, but because it appeared to be a routine database query using valid credentials during normal working hours, it didn't trigger any alerts. So your software didn't work? Our software worked exactly as designed, but the attack was designed to exploit that functionality. It's like someone used a stolen key to enter a building. The security system doesn't alert because the entry appears legitimate. I spent the next 4 hours on a conference call with Detective Walsh, Pinnacle's owner, their IT manager, and a cybersecurity consultant the police had brought in to investigate the incident. As we pieced together what had happened, the picture became clearer and more concerning. The attacker had gained access to Jake Morrison's credentials through a sophisticated phishing email sent to his personal account 2 weeks earlier. The email had appeared to come from Pinnacle's accounting software vendor, asking him to update his login information for security purposes. Jake had entered his credentials on what looked like a legitimate website, unknowingly giving the attacker everything they needed to access Pinnacle's systems. Once inside the network, the attacker had spent several days conducting reconnaissance, learning the normal patterns of database access and file transfers. When they finally extracted the customer and payroll data, they did it in a way that mimicked routine administrative tasks, avoiding the behavioral anomalies that would have triggered ShieldNet's alerts. The good news, said the cybersecurity consultant, is that this attack would have succeeded against any security system currently on the market. The attacker used legitimate credentials during normal business hours to access data that the credential holder had legitimate reason to access. No rule-based or behavioral analysis system would have flagged this as suspicious. The bad news, Detective Walsh continued, is that we're dealing with a very sophisticated threat actor who clearly understands how modern security systems work and how to circumvent them. After the call ended, I sat in the Techstars office staring at my laptop screen, trying to process what this meant for ShieldNet and for my upcoming Demo Day presentation. On one hand, the technical analysis had confirmed that my software had performed exactly as designed and that no security system could have prevented this particular attack. On the other hand, I now had a client who'd suffered a significant data breach while using my software, and that fact would inevitably become part of any due diligence process with potential investors. Rebecca found me there 2 hours later, still staring at my screen and trying to figure out how to handle the situation. "What's wrong?" she asked, settling into the chair next to mine. "You look like someone just told you the world was ending." I explained the entire situation, the breach, the investigation, the sophisticated attack methodology, the implications for ShieldNet's reputation, and my ability to raise funding. "This is actually not as bad as you think," Rebecca said after I'd finished. "In fact, it might be an opportunity to demonstrate something important about your approach to cybersecurity." "How is a client data breach an opportunity?" "Because you just proved that when a security incident occurs, you respond professionally and transparently. You worked with law enforcement, you conducted a thorough technical analysis, and you identified exactly what happened and why. That's exactly what investors want to see in a security company founder." She opened her laptop and pulled up a news article from the previous month. "Look at this. Equifax, one of the largest credit reporting agencies in the country, suffered a breach that exposed data for 147 million people. Their response was to downplay the incident, delay disclosure, and blame external factors. That's what destroys companies and careers. But investors are going to hear that one of my clients got breached and assume my software doesn't work. Smart investors are going to hear that you responded to a sophisticated attack with technical competence and professional integrity. They're going to understand that no security system is perfect, but the quality of a security company is measured by how they handle incidents when they occur. Rebecca helped me develop a strategy for addressing the Pinnacle incident in my demo day presentation. Instead of hiding from it or hoping it wouldn't come up, we decided to lead with it as an example of the sophisticated threats that small businesses faced and how ShieldNet helped them respond effectively when attacks occurred. The reality is that cybersecurity isn't about preventing every possible attack, I said during one of our practice sessions. It's about detecting threats quickly, responding effectively, and minimizing damage when incidents occur. The Pinnacle case demonstrates all three of those capabilities. The approach felt risky, but it also felt honest. I'd learned enough about the cybersecurity industry to know that every company in the space dealt with incidents and failures. The companies that succeeded were the ones that learned from these experiences and used them to improve their capabilities. 2 days before demo day, I got a call from Jake Morrison at Pinnacle Construction. Sarah, I wanted to call and thank you for how you handled this whole situation. I know it wasn't your fault. I'm the one who fell for that phishing email. But the way you worked with the police and helped us understand what happened, that was above and beyond what I expected. I appreciate that, Jake. How are you guys recovering from the incident? Actually, better than I thought we would. Because your software had been logging everything, we were able to prove to our insurance company exactly what data was accessed and when. That made the claims process much smoother. And because you helped us identify the attack vector, we've been able to implement additional training and procedures to prevent similar incidents. Are you planning to continue using ShieldNet? Absolutely. If anything, this incident proved to me that we need this kind of monitoring and response capability. The attacker was sophisticated, but your software gave us the visibility we needed to understand what happened and respond appropriately. After that conversation, I felt a shift in how I understood the Pinnacle incident. Instead of seeing it as a failure of my software, I began to see it as validation of my broader approach to cybersecurity. ShieldNet hadn't prevented the attack, but it had enabled a rapid, informed response that minimized damage and facilitated recovery. That realization changed how I prepared for demo day. Instead of feeling defensive about the incident, I felt confident that it demonstrated something important about my understanding of real-world cybersecurity challenges. Investors who understood the industry would recognize that competence, and investors who didn't probably weren't the right partners for a cybersecurity company anyway. The night before demo day, I called my parents to let them know about the presentation. It felt important to have them understand that tomorrow wasn't just about raising money. It was about proving that the path I'd chosen could lead somewhere significant. We'll be thinking about you, my mother said. We're proud of you, sweetheart, regardless of what happens tomorrow. Thanks, Mom. That means more than you know. As I hung up the phone, I realized that their approval, while welcome, was no longer essential to my sense of confidence or purpose. The Pinnacle incident had taught me something important about my own capabilities under pressure. I could handle complex problems, communicate effectively with stakeholders, and maintain professional standards even when the stakes were high. Those were the qualities that would determine my success as an entrepreneur, regardless of what happened during a 4-minute presentation to investors. Demo day arrived with the kind of crisp December morning that made Boulder feel like the center of the universe. The event was held at the Fox Theater, a restored 1920s venue that Techstars had transformed into a modern presentation space. By 8 a.m., entrepreneurs were setting up their demo stations in the lobby, while investors began filtering in with coffee and the kind of casual confidence that comes from having the checkbooks everyone else wanted access to. I'd arrived early to run through my presentation one final time on the actual stage. Standing at the podium, looking out at rows of empty seats that would soon hold some of the most influential people in the startup ecosystem, I felt a familiar mix of nerves and determination. This was my 4 minutes to distill everything I'd learned about cybersecurity, small business needs, and entrepreneurship into a story that would convince strangers to bet money on my vision. The other 29 companies in my cohort were scattered around the venue, some rehearsing quietly in corners, others engaging in animated conversations with their mentors and coaches. I recognized the energy from my military days, the focused intensity that precedes any high stakes mission, where preparation meets opportunity and outcomes are determined by performance under pressure. Rebecca found me backstage 30 minutes before the presentations began. "How are you feeling?" "Ready," I said, and realized I meant it. Whatever happens today, I know I've built something that works and that people need. The rest is just communication. That's exactly the right mindset. Remember, you're not trying to convince people to like you, you're trying to help them understand a business opportunity. Stay focused on the facts and let the data tell the story. The presentations began with companies from the consumer technology track, mobile apps, e commerce platforms, social media tools. I watched from the wings as entrepreneur after entrepreneur took the stage, each delivering polished 4-minute pitches that had been refined through weeks of practice and feedback. The quality was consistently high, but so was the competition. Every company had traction, every founder had compelling credentials, every business model addressed a significant market opportunity. My slot was 15th out of 30, positioned in the middle of the enterprise technology section. As the companies before me presented their solutions for marketing automation, HR management, and supply chain optimization, I reviewed my opening lines one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah Martinez, founder of ShieldNet." I walked to center stage and looked out at an audience of about 200 people, their faces lit by the glow of laptops and phones as they took notes and evaluated investment opportunities. In the front rows, I could see representatives from venture capital firms whose names I recognized from TechCrunch articles and startup success stories. 3 weeks ago, one of my clients suffered a sophisticated cyber attack that compromised their customer database and employee payroll information. This attack would have succeeded against any security system currently on the market, but here's what made the difference. My software gave them complete visibility into what happened, when it happened, and how to respond effectively. I had their attention immediately. Leading with the Pinnacle incident was risky, but it accomplished exactly what Rebecca and I had hoped. It established real world credibility and differentiated ShieldNet from companies that only talked about theoretical capabilities. Small businesses are under constant cyber attack, but they can't afford the enterprise security solutions that large corporations use. Existing options are either too expensive, too complicated, or too simplistic to be effective. ShieldNet provides automated threat detection and response capabilities designed specifically for companies with fewer than 50 employees. I walk them through the core functionality, showing screenshots of the monitoring dashboard and explaining how the machine learning algorithms adapted to each business's normal patterns. But instead of focusing on technical features, I emphasized business outcomes: prevented attacks, reduced downtime, compliance with insurance requirements, peace of mind for business owners. In the past 6 months, I've deployed ShieldNet in 12 businesses across 5 different industries. These clients have experienced zero successful attacks, and the software has prevented an average of 4 security incidents per month per customer. Total customer acquisition cost is under $200. Monthly recurring revenue per customer averages $120, and customer retention rate is 100%. The numbers were solid, but what made them compelling was the context I'd established with the Pinnacle story. These weren't theoretical projections. They were results achieved in real business environments against actual threats. The market opportunity is significant. There are over 30 million small businesses in the United States, and cyber crime damages are projected to reach $6 trillion globally by 2025. Most of that damage will impact smaller companies that lack adequate security infrastructure. I moved into the competitive landscape, acknowledging the major players in enterprise cybersecurity while explaining why their solutions didn't address small business needs. Then I outlined ShieldNet's go to market strategy, focusing on the channel partnerships and referral programs that had already begun generating consistent customer acquisition. I'm raising $800,000 in seed funding to scale customer acquisition, build out our technical team, and expand our product capabilities. With this funding, we project reaching 1,000 customers and $2 million in annual recurring revenue within 18 months, As I delivered my closing lines, I felt the same clarity I'd experienced during critical moments in Afghanistan: complete focus on the mission, confidence in my preparation, and acceptance that outcomes would be determined by execution rather than anxiety. ShieldNet is protecting small businesses today, and we're ready to scale that protection to thousands of companies that currently have no viable cybersecurity options. Thank you. The applause was polite but sustained, and I caught Rebecca nodding approvingly from the side of the stage. More importantly, I noticed several investors making notes and flagging my company information for follow up conversations. The networking session began immediately after the presentations concluded. Companies set up stations in the theater lobby, and investors circulated with the focused efficiency of people who'd seen hundreds of pitches and knew exactly what questions to ask. Within minutes of reaching my station, I was deep in conversation with David Park from Foundry Group, a Boulder based venture capital firm that specialized in early stage technology companies. The Pinnacle incident was interesting, he said without preamble. Most founders would have tried to hide something like that. Why did you lead with it? Because it demonstrates something important about cybersecurity that most people don't understand. Perfect prevention isn't possible, especially against sophisticated attackers. What matters is detection speed, response quality, and recovery effectiveness. That incident proved ShieldNet delivers on all three. Walk me through your customer acquisition strategy. 12 customers is impressive traction, but how do you get to 1,000? I explained the referral programs I developed with business consultants like Tom Bradley, the partnerships I was building with insurance companies and accounting firms, and the content marketing strategy I planned to implement with additional funding. What about technical scalability? Can your current architecture handle 100 times more customers? The core platform was designed for scale from day one. I learned that lesson in the military. You always build systems assuming they'll need to handle more load than you initially expect. Our current infrastructure can support several hundred customers without modification, and we have a clear roadmap for scaling to thousands. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, covering everything from competitive threats to hiring plans to long-term strategic vision. David asked tough questions, but they were the questions of someone evaluating an investment opportunity rather than looking for reasons to dismiss it. Similar conversations played out throughout the afternoon. Sarah Kim from Access Venture Partners wanted to understand the regulatory landscape for cybersecurity software. Michael Torres from Colorado Impact Fund was interested in the social impact potential of making cybersecurity accessible to underserved businesses. Jennifer Walsh from Techstars Ventures focused on the team building challenges I'd face as the company scaled. By the end of the day, I'd had substantive conversations with 8 different investors and collected business cards from a dozen others who wanted to continue discussions over the following weeks. 3 firms explicitly mentioned their interest in leading a seed round, and 2 others asked for detailed financial projections and customer references. But the conversation that surprised me most came from an unexpected source. As I was packing up my materials at the end of the networking session, a woman in her 50s approached my station with a confidence that suggested she wasn't just another investor. Sarah Martinez? I'm Linda Chen, CTO at Palantir. I was in the audience today, and I wanted to tell you that your presentation was the most realistic discussion of cybersecurity challenges I've heard from an early stage company. Thank you. That means a lot coming from someone with your background. I'm not here as an investor, but I wanted to mention that Palantir is always looking for strategic partnerships with companies that understand the real world application of security technology. If you're interested in exploring enterprise opportunities as you scale, I'd love to continue this conversation. I walked out of the Fox Theater that evening with my head spinning from the sheer volume of opportunities that had emerged from 4 minutes on stage. The funding conversations were encouraging, but the strategic partnership discussion with Palantir represented something I hadn't even considered: the possibility that ShieldNet could become a platform for serving enterprise customers as well as small businesses. That night, I called Maya to debrief on the day's events. It sounds like you absolutely nailed it, she said after I'd walked through the key conversations. Multiple interested investors, potential strategic partnerships, validation from industry leaders. Like, hey, that's exactly what you want from a demo day. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to point out some obvious flaw in my business model that I've been too naive to see. Sarah, you've been building and testing this business for 8 months. You have paying customers, proven demand, and clear differentiation from competitors. The only thing that's changed is that now other people can see what you've been building. That's not naivety, that's competence. As I prepared for bed that night, I thought about the journey from my father's dismissive comments at graduation to standing on a stage in front of 200 investors, presenting a company that was generating real revenue and solving real problems. The distance between those two moments felt enormous, but it had been covered one decision at a time. The decision to ignore the skeptics, the decision to focus on customer needs, the decision to bet on my own capabilities when no one else would. Tomorrow would bring follow up meetings, due diligence requests, and term sheet negotiations. But tonight, I allowed myself to feel proud of what I'd accomplished and excited about what came next. The first term sheet arrived 2 days after demo day, delivered via email at 6:47 a.m. while I was drinking coffee and reviewing customer support tickets. David Park from Foundry Group was offering $750,000 for 18% of the company, valuing ShieldNet at just over $4 million. The email was professional and straightforward, but seeing those numbers attached to something I'd built in my apartment felt surreal. I forwarded the term sheet to Rebecca immediately, knowing I needed experienced guidance to evaluate what was essentially the first major financial decision of my entrepreneurial career. We met that afternoon at a coffee shop near the Techstars office, spreading the documents across a small table while she walked me through each provision. This is a solid offer, she said, pointing to the valuation section. 4.2 million pre-money is fair for a company at your stage with your traction. The liquidation preferences are standard, and they're not asking for unusual board control or veto rights. But but you should wait to see what other offers materialize before making any decisions. Sarah Kim from Access mentioned she was preparing a term sheet and you had good conversations with several other firms. This is a competitive situation which gives you leverage. That leverage became apparent over the next week as two additional term sheets arrived. Access Venture Partners offered $800,000 for 16%, valuing the company higher but requiring a faster timeline for deploying the capital. Colorado Impact Fund proposed $600,000 for 15%, with additional milestone-based funding available if we hit specific growth targets. Each offer represented a different philosophy about company building and investor relations. Foundry Group brought deep technical expertise and a network of enterprise software contacts. Access Venture Partners had relationships with major cybersecurity companies and experience scaling B2B software startups. Colorado Impact Fund focused on social impact investing and could help position ShieldNet as a solution for underserved communities. The decision felt overwhelming until I remembered something Rebecca had told me during our first mentoring session. The best investors are the ones who understand your market and can accelerate your growth, not just the ones offering the highest valuation. I spent the weekend researching each firm's portfolio companies, reading interviews with their founders, and trying to understand which partnership would be most valuable for ShieldNet's long-term success. By Sunday evening, I'd narrowed my preference to Foundry Group, not because their offer was the most attractive financially, but because their expertise in enterprise software and their portfolio of successful cybersecurity investments aligned perfectly with where I wanted to take the company. The negotiation process took another 2 weeks, with lawyers reviewing contract language and investors conducting due diligence on ShieldNet's technology, customers, and financial projections. I provided references for all 12 current customers, detailed technical documentation, and financial records going back to my first sale. The process was exhaustive but also validating. Every question reinforced that I'd built something substantial and well documented. The final terms were signed on January 15th, exactly 8 months after my father had declared at graduation that I'd never succeed in business. $750,000 in exchange for 18% equity, with Foundry Group taking one board seat and providing ongoing strategic support. The money would hit my bank account within a week, transforming ShieldNet from a bootstrapped side project into a venture-backed technology company. But the real celebration came 3 days later, when I received an unexpected phone call from Elena Rodriguez, my very first customer. Sarah, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I wanted to share some good news. Do you remember how I mentioned your software to my business association a few months ago? Of course. That's how I got several of my early customers. Well, I was just elected president of the Colorado Small Business Alliance. It's a statewide organization with over 3,000 members. One of my first initiatives is going to be a cybersecurity education program, and I want ShieldNet to be the recommended solution for our members. I sat down hard in my desk chair, temporarily speechless. The Colorado Small Business Alliance represented exactly the kind of systematic customer acquisition channel I'd been dreaming about. Access to thousands of potential customers who were already organized around shared business needs and challenges. Elena, that would be incredible. What would that partnership look like? We'd negotiate special pricing for our members, maybe some kind of educational program where you help them understand cybersecurity basics, and then offer ShieldNet as the preferred implementation partner. I'm thinking it could help hundreds of small businesses improve their security while also scaling your company. After we hung up, I realized that the funding, the validation, and the growth opportunities were all important. But this conversation represented something even more meaningful. Elena wasn't offering this partnership because she felt sorry for me or because she wanted to help a struggling entrepreneur. She was offering it because ShieldNet had proven valuable enough to her business that she wanted to help other business owners access the same protection. That evening, I called my parents to share the news about both the funding and the potential partnership. The conversation was completely different from any we'd had since graduation. Sarah, this is incredible, my father said, his voice carrying a pride I hadn't heard since my deployment ceremony. I have to admit I didn't understand what you were building, but it sounds like you really knew what you were doing. The funding is great, my mother added, but what really impresses me is that your customers trust you enough to recommend you to their friends and colleagues. That says something about the quality of what you've built. Thanks, Mom. That means a lot. We owe you an apology, my father continued. At graduation, we thought we were protecting you from failure, but we were really protecting ourselves from uncertainty. We didn't understand your industry or your capabilities, and instead of admitting that, we projected our fears onto your dreams. The conversation continued for another hour, covering everything from my hiring plans to my long-term vision for the company. For the first time since college, I felt like my parents saw me as a competent adult whose judgment they respected, rather than a naive idealist who needed their guidance. But the most satisfying moment came the next morning, when Carlos called me directly. Sarah, I've been thinking about our conversation from a few months ago when I offered to introduce you to some contacts in the insurance industry. Is that still something you'd be interested in? Absolutely. Why? Because I've been watching what you've accomplished and I realized something. You didn't just prove that you could start a business, you proved that you understand business better than most people I work with. I want to help however I can. We spent 30 minutes discussing potential partnerships between ShieldNet and insurance companies, ways to bundle cybersecurity services with business insurance policies, and opportunities to leverage Carlos's industry relationships for customer acquisition. After that call, I sat in my apartment, the same studio where I'd worked alone for months, wondering if my family might be right about my limitations, and marveled at how completely everything had changed. The funding would allow me to hire employees, expand product capabilities, and scale customer acquisition. The strategic partnerships would provide systematic channels for growth, and my family had transformed from skeptics into supporters, offering their own networks and expertise to help ShieldNet succeed. But underneath all of these external validations, the most important change was internal. I no longer needed anyone else's permission to believe in what I was building. The customers, the investors, and the family support were all welcome, but they were confirmations of something I'd already proven to myself through months of disciplined work and incremental progress. That night, I opened my laptop and began drafting job descriptions for ShieldNet's first employees: a senior software engineer to help expand our technical capabilities, a customer success manager to handle the growing volume of support requests and account management, a marketing coordinator to systematize the customer acquisition strategies that had been working organically. Building a team felt like crossing another threshold in the journey from graduation day skepticism to venture backed startup. Each hire would represent someone who believed enough in ShieldNet's potential to bet their career on our success. That was a responsibility I took seriously, but also one I felt prepared to handle. The IPO announcement came on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 2 years and 4 months after I'd signed that first term sheet with Foundry Group. I was sitting in our Boulder headquarters, a converted warehouse space that housed 43 employees and hummed with the constant energy of a fast growing technology company, when our chief financial officer knocked on my office door with a grin that could have lit up the entire building. Sarah, I just got off the phone with Goldman Sachs. They want to move forward with the filing. We're going public. The journey from 750,000 in seed funding to a $200 million initial public offering had been a whirlwind of strategic decisions, tactical executions, and the kind of controlled chaos that defines high-growth startups. We'd raised a Series A round 18 months earlier, bringing in $12 million from Sequoia Capital to accelerate customer acquisition and product development. 6 months after that, we closed a Series B with Andreessen Horowitz, adding $25 million in funding to expand internationally and build out our enterprise platform. But none of those milestones had prepared me for the surreal experience of seeing ShieldNet's name on CNBC as our stock began trading on the NASDAQ. The opening price was $22 per share, valuing the company at just over $200 million and making me, at 29 years old, the youngest female veteran to lead a successful technology IPO. The media attention was immediate and intense. Business Insider ran a feature story titled "From Military Base to NASDAQ: How a Female Veteran Built a Cybersecurity Empire." Forbes included me in their 30 under 30 list for enterprise technology. The Wall Street Journal profiled ShieldNet as an example of how venture capital was finally addressing the cybersecurity needs of small businesses. But the coverage that meant the most to me came from an unexpected source. The Colorado Springs Gazette, my hometown newspaper, ran a front-page story about local entrepreneurs making national headlines. The article included quotes from several of my high school teachers, my former commanding officer from Afghanistan, and, most surprisingly, my father. I'll be honest, he told the reporter, when Sarah first talked about starting a technology company, I didn't think it was realistic. I was wrong. She understood something about the market that the rest of us didn't see. And she had the persistence to turn that understanding into a real business. I'm proud of her, but more than that, I'm impressed by her. Reading those words while sitting in my corner office, looking out at employees who were building software that protected thousands of small businesses across North America and Europe, I felt a complex mix of vindication and forgiveness. The vindication was obvious. I'd proven that the dreams my family had dismissed as unrealistic were actually conservative estimates of what was possible. But forgiveness was more important. I understood now that their skepticism had come from love, from a desire to protect me from disappointment in a world they didn't fully understand. The IPO celebrations were elaborate and well-deserved. We rented out the Boulder Theater for a company-wide party, complete with live music, catered food, and champagne toasts that went well into the evening. Rebecca Chen, who'd remained an advisor and friend throughout the journey, gave a speech that captured the significance of what we'd accomplished. 2.5 years ago, Sarah was a solo founder working out of a studio apartment, trying to convince people that small businesses needed better cybersecurity solutions. Today, ShieldNet protects over 8,000 companies in 12 countries, employs 43 people, and has proven that venture capital can build businesses that serve underserved markets profitably and at scale. But the moment that felt most significant happened away from the cameras and celebration, during a quiet conversation with Elena Rodriguez, who'd flown in from Denver for the IPO celebration. She was now a member of our customer advisory board and had become one of our most effective advocates in the small business community. "You know what I'm most proud of," she said as we stepped outside the theater for some fresh air? "It's not just that you succeeded. It's that you succeeded by actually solving our problems. A lot of tech companies talk about helping small businesses, but they build products for themselves and then try to convince us we need them. You built something we actually needed, and you never lost sight of that. That's because I remember what it felt like to be underestimated, I said. I knew what it was like to have people assume I wasn't capable of handling complex challenges. I wasn't going to do that to small business owners. The week following the IPO brought a steady stream of interview requests, conference invitations, and partnership proposals. Harvard Business School asked me to guest lecture in their entrepreneurship program. The Pentagon invited me to speak at a conference on veteran entrepreneurship. Three different venture capital firms offered me positions as an entrepreneur in residence. But the opportunity that excited me most came from an unexpected source. Jennifer Chen, the CTO from Palantir, who'd approached me after Demo Day 2 years earlier, called to propose a strategic partnership that could transform ShieldNet's enterprise capabilities. We've been watching your growth trajectory, Caro, she said, and we think there's an opportunity to integrate ShieldNet's small business platform with our enterprise security infrastructure. Essentially, we'd be creating a comprehensive cybersecurity solution that scales from solo entrepreneurs to Fortune 500 companies. The partnership would involve significant technical integration, joint product development, and shared go to market strategies. More importantly, it would position ShieldNet as a major player in the broader cybersecurity industry rather than just a small business solution provider. As I considered the proposal, I realized that the IPO wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of an entirely new phase of growth and opportunity. We'd proven that ShieldNet could build a sustainable business serving small companies. Now we had the resources and credibility to expand that mission to organizations of every size. That evening, I called my parents to share the news about the Palantir partnership and to thank them for their support throughout the journey. The conversation was warm and proud, but also touched with amazement at how far we'd all come from that graduation day 2.5 years earlier. You know what I learned from all this? My father said near the end of our call. I learned that there's a difference between being practical and being limited. I thought I was teaching you to be practical, but I was really teaching you to be limited. I'm glad you didn't listen. I needed to hear your concerns, I said. They helped me understand what I was up against and what I needed to prove, but I also needed to trust my own judgment about what was possible. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and began drafting an email to Jennifer Chen, accepting the partnership proposal and outlining next steps for integration planning. As I wrote, I could hear the voices of my 43 employees working late in the office around me, building features and serving customers, and expanding the capabilities of a platform that had started as a class project in my college dorm room. The journey from graduation day skepticism to NASDAQ IPO had taught me something important about the relationship between ambition and achievement. Dreams aren't made real by avoiding risk or seeking approval from people who don't understand your vision. They're made real by focusing on problems worth solving, building solutions that actually work, and persisting through the inevitable challenges that separate ideas from execution. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new ways to expand ShieldNet's impact on the cybersecurity landscape. But tonight, I allowed myself to feel proud of what we'd accomplished and excited about what came next. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. in our main conference room, which we'd hastily converted into a media center with proper lighting and ShieldNet banners. Representatives from TechCrunch, Forbes, the Wall Street Journal, and several cybersecurity trade publications had gathered to hear about our partnership with Palantir and our expansion into enterprise markets. I stood at the podium, looking out at journalists and cameras, remembering the last time I'd faced this kind of scrutiny, Demo Day at Techstars, when everything had felt uncertain and provisional. Today marks a significant milestone, not just for ShieldNet, but for how we think about cybersecurity across different market segments, and I began. Small businesses and large enterprises face fundamentally similar threats, but they've been served by completely different solutions. Our partnership with Palantir allows us to create a unified platform that scales protection from solo entrepreneurs to multinational corporations. The questions came immediately, ranging from technical integration challenges to market competition to long-term strategic vision. One journalist from Cybersecurity Weekly asked about our approach to competing with established enterprise security vendors. We're not trying to replace existing enterprise solutions, I explained. We're trying to fill the gaps that exist when companies grow from small business systems to enterprise infrastructure. Most cybersecurity platforms assume you're either completely small or completely enterprise, but real companies exist on a spectrum. Our partnership with Palantir allows us to serve that entire spectrum seamlessly. After the press conference, I retreated to my office to process the magnitude of what we'd just announced publicly. The partnership represented more than just business expansion. It was validation that the approach we developed for small businesses could scale to address enterprise needs as well. More personally, it confirmed that the quiet confidence I'd developed in my own judgment over the past 2 years was justified. Maya called while I was reviewing partnership integration timelines, her voice carrying the excitement I'd come to associate with major breakthrough moments. Sarah, I just saw the TechCrunch article about the Palantir partnership. This is incredible. You're basically creating a new category in cybersecurity. It feels surreal, I admitted. 2 years ago, I was trying to convince investors that small businesses needed better security solutions. Now we're partnering with one of the most sophisticated security companies in the world to serve enterprise customers. What's next? I looked out my office window at the Boulder Flatirons, thinking about the trajectory we'd established and the opportunities that were emerging. International expansion, deeper AI integration, maybe acquisition of complementary technologies. The IPO gave us the resources to think bigger than we've ever been able to think before. That afternoon brought a surprise visitor, Carlos, who'd driven up from Denver to congratulate me in person and discuss some business opportunities he'd been developing. We met at the same coffee shop where I'd spent countless hours during my early Techstars days, working alone on code and wondering if any of it would matter. I've been thinking about something, he said over coffee and sandwiches. My insurance company has been looking for ways to offer cybersecurity services to our small business clients. Would ShieldNet be interested in a white label partnership where we provide your software as part of our business insurance packages? The proposal was exactly the kind of systematic customer acquisition channel that could accelerate our growth in the small business market while we developed enterprise capabilities. That could be huge, Carlos. How many small business clients does your company serve? About 12,000 across Colorado and Wyoming. And if it works for us, I know other regional insurance companies who'd be interested in similar partnerships. We spent 2 hours discussing implementation details, pricing structures, and go to market strategies. By the end of the conversation, we'd outlined a partnership that could potentially reach 50,000 small businesses within 18 months. Driving back to the office, I reflected on how completely my relationship with my family had transformed. Carlos wasn't just offering professional support. He was actively building business opportunities that leveraged his industry expertise to accelerate ShieldNet's growth. My parents had become informal advocates, mentioning the company to friends and colleagues who owned small businesses. Even my extended family had shifted from skeptical observers to enthusiastic supporters who followed our progress through news coverage and social media. But the transformation that mattered most was internal. I no longer needed external validation to believe in my own capabilities or judgment. The customers, investors, partners, and family support were all welcome, but they were confirmations of something I'd proven to myself through years of disciplined execution and incremental progress. That evening, I called Rebecca Chen to update her on the day's developments and get her perspective on the strategic opportunities we were evaluating. As one of my earliest supporters and advisors, she'd watched the entire journey from struggling startup to public company. What strikes me most about your story, she said, is how consistently you've stayed focused on solving real problems for real customers. A lot of successful entrepreneurs get distracted by vanity metrics or ego-driven decisions, but you've always remained grounded in customer value. I think that comes from being underestimated early on. You did, I said. When people don't expect much from you, you learn to focus on results rather than perception. As I prepared to leave the office that night, I walked through our development area where engineers were working late on the integration planning for our Palantir partnership. The energy was focused and optimistic, the kind of atmosphere that emerges when people believe they're building something significant. I stopped by the marketing department, where our team was preparing materials for the international expansion we'd been planning. Press releases in French and German, partnership proposals for European cybersecurity resellers, compliance documentation for various regulatory environments. Finally, I visited our customer success team, where representatives were handling support requests from businesses across 12 countries and 6 time zones. These conversations, troubleshooting technical issues, explaining new features, helping customers respond to security incidents, represented the core of what ShieldNet had always been about. Standing in that bustling office, watching employees who'd joined our mission to protect small businesses from cyber threats, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that went beyond financial success or public recognition. We'd built something that mattered, something that made the world safer for entrepreneurs and small business owners who were trying to build their own dreams. The journey from graduation day skepticism to the international cybersecurity platform has taught me that the most meaningful victories aren't about proving other people wrong. They're about proving yourself right when it matters most. The call came while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my office, exactly 3 years to the day after my graduation ceremony. My assistant knocked and said my father was on the line, which was unusual. He typically called my cell phone, and rarely during business hours. "Sarah, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," he said, his voice carrying a formality that suggested this wasn't a casual conversation. "Not at all, Dad. What's going on?" "I'm calling because I owe you something. An apology, yes, but more than that. I owe you an acknowledgement of just how wrong I was, and how right you were about what you could accomplish." I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the Boulder skyline through floor to ceiling windows that would have been unimaginable 3 years ago when I was working from my studio apartment. "Dad, we've talked about this. You were trying to protect me." "No, let me finish. I've been thinking about this for months, ever since I saw you on CNBC talking about the IPO. It wasn't just that I underestimated your capabilities, I fundamentally misunderstood what success looks like in your generation and your industry." He paused, and I could hear him choosing his words carefully. "I thought success meant finding a stable job, working your way up slowly, avoiding risks that could derail your career. But you understood something I didn't, that the biggest risk was playing it safe in a world that rewards innovation and bold thinking. The construction industry has taught me to value predictability," he continued. "You build according to established plans, you follow proven methods, you minimize variables that could cause problems. But technology doesn't work that way, does it? In your world, you have to bet on ideas that haven't been proven yet." I felt my throat tighten with unexpected emotion. This wasn't just an apology. It was my father grappling with fundamental questions about risk, ambition, and what constituted wise decision making in a rapidly changing economy. "The thing is, Dad, I learned some of that caution from you. It's what made me focus on solving real customer problems instead of just building cool technology. It's what made me bootstrap the business until I had proven demand. The military taught me discipline, but you taught me the importance of building something solid." "Maybe that's true," he said. "But I also tried to talk you out of the biggest opportunity of your life because I couldn't see past my own limitations." That afternoon, I drove down to Denver for dinner with my parents at the same restaurant where we'd had that painful conversation the night before graduation. The contrast was jarring. 3 years ago, I'd sat at this table listening to my father explain why my business dreams were unrealistic. Now I was sitting at the same table as the CEO of a publicly traded company, discussing expansion plans and strategic partnerships. But the conversation that meant the most happened toward the end of the evening, when my mother pulled out her phone to show me something. "I've been keeping track of the news articles about ShieldNet," she said, scrolling through a folder of saved links. "Not just the business coverage, but the stories about the customers you've helped. There was one last month about a small veterinary clinic in Montana that prevented a ransomware attack because of your software. They would have lost years of patient records." She showed me the article, which quoted the clinic owner describing how ShieldNet had detected and blocked an attack that could have shut down her practice for weeks. Reading stories like that made me realize something important. You didn't just build a successful business, you built something that protects other people's dreams. "That's always been the point," I said. Small business owners work incredibly hard to build something meaningful. They shouldn't have to choose between cybersecurity and everything else they need to invest in. My father nodded slowly. I understand that now, and I understand why you were willing to take risks that seemed unreasonable to me. You weren't just betting on yourself, you were betting on your ability to solve problems that really mattered. The drive back to Boulder that night felt different from any drive I'd taken in years. Not because of the conversation with my parents, though that had been important, but because of the clarity it had given me about the journey I'd taken and the choices that had made it possible. The transformation from dismissed dreamer to successful entrepreneur hadn't happened because I'd ignored everyone's advice or because I'd been recklessly confident in my own abilities. It had happened because I'd learned to distinguish between useful caution and limiting fear, between practical concerns and projections of other people's insecurities. My parents' skepticism had actually served an important purpose. It had forced me to build ShieldNet on a foundation of customer validation and financial sustainability rather than just technological innovation. Their concerns had made me more thorough, more disciplined, and more focused on real world applications rather than theoretical possibilities. But their limitations had also taught me something crucial about entrepreneurship. The people who love you most will often be the least equipped to understand the risks worth taking. Not because they don't want you to succeed, but because they can only evaluate opportunities through the lens of their own experience and understanding. As I pulled into my driveway that night, I thought about the thousands of small business owners who were sleeping peacefully because ShieldNet was monitoring their networks, detecting threats, and protecting the digital assets that represented years of hard work and investment. That impact, the ability to solve meaningful problems at scale, had been worth every moment of uncertainty. Every conversation with skeptical family members, every night spent coding alone in my apartment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new ways to expand our impact on the cybersecurity landscape. But tonight, I felt a deep sense of completion about the journey from graduation day dismissal to IPO vindication. I'd proven to myself, to my family, and to the world that quiet determination and customer focused innovation could build something significant. Most importantly, I've learned that success isn't about proving other people wrong. It's about staying true to your own vision when the path forward isn't clear to anyone else. Sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to let other people's limitations become your own. 6 months later, I was invited back to the University of Colorado Boulder as the keynote speaker for their business school graduation ceremony. Standing at the same podium where my own journey had begun with such uncertainty, I looked out at 500 graduates and their families, remembering exactly how I'd felt in their position. 3.5 years ago, I sat where you're sitting today, I began. That afternoon, my father told me I'd never succeed in business, that my dreams were too big for someone like me. Last week, ShieldNet was acquired by Palantir for $1.2 billion. dollars. The gasps from the audience were audible. I hadn't planned to announce the acquisition this way, but it felt right to share it first with the community where everything had started. I'm not telling you this to brag, but to make a point. The people who love you most will often be the least equipped to understand the risks worth taking. They'll project their fears onto your dreams because they can only see through the lens of their own experience. I paused, looking out at faces that reminded me of my younger self, eager, uncertain, ready to change the world, but not sure how. Your job isn't to prove them wrong. Your job is to prove yourself right. Focus on solving real problems for real people. Build something that matters. And never, ever let someone else's limitations become your own. As applause filled the auditorium, I spotted my parents in the front row, beaming with pride. My father caught my eye and mouthed, "I'm sorry." But I shook my head and mouthed back, "Thank you." His skepticism had made me stronger, more determined, more focused on building something that truly mattered. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever been told your dreams are too big, drop a comment below and share your story. What would you do if everyone around you said it was impossible? Let me know what time you're watching this and where you're from. I read every single comment. And if you want to hear more stories about overcoming doubt and building something meaningful, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because the world needs more people who refuse to let other people's limitations define what's possible. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to give up.